There's a very specific kind of silence that settles in a garage. Not the comforting quiet of a living room or the heavy hush of an empty church. No, a garage holds a practical, almost judgmental sort of silence. It's a place where things get fixed, where messes are supposed to be sorted out and shelves are lined with tools that suggest you know what you're doing. That's where I was, Saturday afternoon, sweat under my flannel, holding a dented leaf blower with a motor that sounded like a dying squirrel and a fuse that had blown one too many times. That's when it happened. That's when everything shifted. Ruth, my wife of 6.5 years and a woman who could find a way to blame me for the weather, burst into the garage mid-rant about the upstairs smoke alarm beeping again. Apparently, the batteries had developed a personal vendetta against her. She had curlers in her hair like landmines and a pink bathrobe cinched with a level of aggression that could strangle a deer. I didn't look up. I simply pointed at the second shelf where the batteries were, behind the old popcorn machine we used exactly once. On our first New Year's Eve together, when she said making popcorn from scratch was quaint. It was also, as I discovered, messy, inconvenient, and far too buttery for her delicate digestive system. Popcorn joined the long list of things we never did again, somewhere between spontaneous road trips and shared showers. "Douglas," she said, arms crossed now, voice pitched at the frequency known to shatter glass and patience. "Why do we even have this garage if it's just going to be a museum of broken appliances?" "Good question," I muttered, standing. "Why do we have that spare bedroom if it's just going to be a walk-in closet for your seasonal throw pillows?" That got me the look. The look. Capital L. You married men know it. It's the one where her eyes narrow like she's trying to solve you, and failing, and deciding instead that it's easier to loathe you. She turned on her heel and stormed off, but something slipped out of her bathrobe pocket as she spun. It hit the floor with a metallic clink. I bent down and picked it up. A tooth. Not a baby tooth. Not a novelty Halloween gag. No, this was a crown. One of Ruth's, unmistakably. I'd paid $1,300 for it 3 years ago and nearly fainted when I saw the receipt. She told me it was medically necessary, but I remember the dentist also used the phrase, optional cosmetic upgrade. Ruth opted. Of course she did. I stared at the tooth in my hand, and here's where things got weird. That crown hadn't been loose. I'd seen her use those teeth every day to bite through celery stalks with the force of a bear trap. So how did it come out? Later that evening, I asked her, casually, over a game of gin rummy, our Saturday tradition ever since we gave up trying to agree on movies. "Oh, that old thing," she said, barely glancing up from her cards. "I must have knocked it out on a coffee mug." "Must have," I said, as she laid down a perfect run of hearts. Now, I'm no Sherlock Holmes, but I've lived with Ruth long enough to know she doesn't knock things. Ruth doesn't trip, doesn't spill, doesn't forget. She moves through life with the precision of a nuclear clock. So for a crown to just fall out, something didn't sit right. And this is where most men go wrong. They either confront, accuse, or snoop. But I've got 3 things going for me. I'm patient. I've got the face of a man no one takes seriously, which is oddly helpful. And I'm deeply underestimated, especially by Ruth. So I waited. Not because I was afraid, but because I was curious, and that's far more dangerous. A few days later, I saw her heading out in the early evening, all done up like she was auditioning for a toothpaste commercial. Hair ironed flat, blouse tucked in too carefully, no curlers, no bathrobe, and, most suspiciously, no complaining. Not a word. She left with a smile. "That's like seeing your house cat operate a blender." "Where you off to?" I asked, keeping my tone cheerful. "Oh, just meeting Janet for wine and a book swap," she said, grabbing her keys. Janet, her co-worker, whose idea of a book swap was usually an argument over who got to keep the better cheese plate. I nodded and let her go. Now here's where things get good. I didn't follow her. I didn't call Janet. Instead, I waited till she came home. Ruth returned 2 hours later, hair slightly windswept and lips smudged in a way I've never seen after a wine night. Not that I've studied her wine nights, but let's just say this didn't fit the pattern. She went straight to the bathroom and shut the door. I gave her 10 minutes and knocked. "You okay in there?" "Fine," she shouted. "Just flossing." "Oh sure, flossing." At 9:47 p.m., with all the intensity of a crime scene cleanup. It wasn't until the next morning, while putting on my socks, that I noticed the clue. No, not lipstick. Not perfume. No suspicious receipts or smeared love letters. Just a shoebox. An ordinary brown shoebox on the top shelf of our shared closet, slightly ajar. Now, to be clear, Ruth never leaves things ajar. Not emotionally. Not spatially. I got the stepladder and nudged it open. Inside, a plastic zip bag containing not one, but two dental crowns. One gold, not hers, and one distinctly familiar. The second was hers, the one I'd picked up in the garage. Ruth was collecting teeth. Now, I don't know what kind of hobby that is, but it raises questions. And, gentlemen, when your wife starts stockpiling human parts, it's either time for marriage counseling or a private investigator. I chose neither. Instead, I did the unthinkable. I waited and waited until one night, over dinner, she casually mentioned, "Oh, did I tell you? I'm going to visit my sister in Spokane next weekend. She's been feeling low." Her sister, who lives in Tampa. "Oh, Spokane," I said, stabbing my meatloaf. "Weather's nice this time of year for dental work." Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "What? You know," I said, smiling. "Teeth. Crowns. Mysterious trauma to the mouth. I just thought maybe you were moonlighting as the tooth fairy." She blinked, slowly, then stood up, quietly, and left the room. No denial. No explanation. Just a quiet retreat, the way a magician might exit after a trick goes sideways. So there it was. I didn't need to catch her in the act. I didn't need photos or texts or lipstick on a shirt collar. I had her dental dam of secrets sitting right there on the closet shelf. And now, I had a plan. But I'll save that for next time. Because as I said, I'm patient. And Ruth? She just lost more than a tooth. She lost the one person who knew how to play the long game. 3 days after the crown incident, Ruth's surprise garage gift, now stored in a small mint tin in my nightstand next to some old batteries and a pair of cufflinks I haven't worn since my brother's second wedding. I stumbled across what I can only describe as an accidental confession in spreadsheet form. It was a Tuesday. Tuesdays have a kind of baked-in dullness that makes them perfect for getting things done no one wants to do. Ruth was at work, or at least she had left the house wearing shoes and carrying a laptop, which counts as plausible. I was working from home. That really just meant toggling between emails and convincing myself I was too mentally tired to go through the junk drawer. I was updating our joint budget spreadsheet, the one we started the year we got married when we still pretended to care about aligning our financial goals. Ruth, ever the obsessive color coder, had separate tabs labeled Utilities, Grocery, Miscellaneous, and my personal favorite, Doug's Hobby Expenses, which included anything she deemed unnecessary for a grown man. Last month, she flagged a $12 purchase of a wire stripper as frivolous. I don't even know what you're supposed to spend money on if not wire strippers and drill bits, but apparently, I missed that adulting seminar. As I clicked through the tabs, I saw a new one. Inspiration. It wasn't color-coded. Not red. Not teal. Not even that light depressing gray she uses for medical copays. It was just plain black text on a white tab, which, in Ruth's universe, was the equivalent of a red siren and a security lockdown. Naturally, I clicked. Inside were 6 columns: date, location, amount, note, link, and something mysteriously titled Reward Value. The list started about 6 months ago and ran right up to last week. Most entries looked like nonsense at first. A $37 charge to a wine store on a Wednesday. $58 at a local boutique I'd never heard of. One entry simply said, Raleigh, $80, bold move. What caught my attention wasn't the amounts or even the vagueness. It was the consistency. Every Friday, like clockwork, there was a new entry. Sometimes Thursdays, occasionally Saturdays, but never skipped. It read like a diary written by someone trying not to leave fingerprints. The reward value column is what made my eyebrows finally lift. One entry, 8 out of 10, great view, better conversation. Another, 6 out of 10, too many questions, weird tie. One just said, 9.5 out of 10, efficient, creative, owns a record player. Let me just pause here and say, I don't own a record player. And I definitely don't score that high in any of her categories. I scrolled down. The most recent one read, 5 out of 10, uneven energy, too agreeable, tried too hard to laugh. My ghost. I sat there in the office chair, which had lost its lumbar support back in the spring, but still squeaked with every shift like it was trying to stay in the conversation. I leaned back, the whole thing groaning under my weight like it, too. had had enough of this nonsense. Ruth, my wife, had been rating other men like Yelp reviews. Reward value? I don't know what reward she was referring to, but I had a strong suspicion it wasn't spiritual enlightenment or a free sandwich punch card. There are people who react immediately when they discover something like this. They call their lawyer, their therapist, their mom. They make dramatic speeches in the driveway and toss wedding rings into sink drains. But me? I printed the spreadsheet. Not all of it. Just 3 entries. The ones with the most detail. I folded the paper like a polite receipt and slid it into the front of a cookbook Ruth hadn't opened in years. Wholesome soups for busy families. Figured it was safe there. I wasn't ready to do anything yet. I was still figuring out how I felt. You'd think betrayed or furious would be the dominant emotions, but mostly, I felt entertained. Because if you're going to sneak around and rank your dates, maybe don't do it in an Excel file saved to a shared Google Drive with your initials in the title. That's not betrayal. That's just lazy. Later that night, Ruth came home. She was humming. Ruth doesn't hum. Humming is for people who like themselves. Ruth believes happiness should be quietly contained or at the very least, not expressed through mouth noises. You're in a good mood, I said, tapping the trackpad, closing the spreadsheet. She gave a little shrug. It was a productive day. I bet, I said, and she gave me a look that said don't start, but I wasn't starting anything. Not yet. Instead, I brought up the basement shelves. The wooden ones are bowing. Probably time to replace them. Maybe this weekend. She blinked at me. We'll see. Which, in Ruth speak, meant never. But I smiled. I'd already decided I was going to replace them whether she liked it or not. The next night, after she went to bed early to read, her code for spending 90 minutes scrolling through high-end bath towel reviews while watching reality TV on mute, I sat down with a notebook. I drew up a list of every person I thought might know something. There were 5 names. I picked the least suspicious one, Marcy from Ruth's trivia team. Marcy is one of those people who looks like she knows too much. Always has a pin in her hair and corrects people's grammar in casual conversation. When I called her up and said I needed a hand with something for Ruth's upcoming birthday, she agreed immediately. Ruth's birthday wasn't for another 3 months, but that detail didn't seem to matter to Marcy. She loves a secret. I met her the next day at a hardware store. I told her Ruth had mentioned wanting a fire pit. She hadn't, and I was hoping Marcy could help me plan a surprise. We stood next to a rack of garden gloves, and I kept steering the conversation to Ruth's Friday nights. She's been working late a lot, I said casually. Oh, Marcy replied, grabbing a pair of gloves like they had answers. Well, you know, that new committee she's on. Committee. She froze, the gloves midair. Well, the neighborhood thing, she said. For, community development. She told me last month. You didn't know? No, I said, with the same expression I use when the bank puts me on hold. She turned pink. Oh, maybe it wasn't official yet. I nodded. Maybe not. Then we bought gloves neither of us needed and parted ways. I didn't need more proof. The spreadsheet was enough. But there's something strange that happens when you find yourself outside of your own life, watching it like a rerun you didn't ask to see again. You become invested. Not because you think you can fix it, but because now it's a story and you want to see how it ends. I went home, took the folded spreadsheet from the soup cookbook, and slipped it into a manila folder I labeled Ruth, Performance Reviews. So far, she scored a 3 out of 10 in subtlety. But the season's not over yet. And I'm keeping score too. On a Thursday evening, Ruth decided to reorganize the spice cabinet. Not because anything was out of place, she just needed to feel superior to cumin again. I sat on the couch pretending to read an article on composite decking while secretly watching her alphabetize oregano like it owed her money. Why do we have 3 containers of paprika? She asked, not looking up. Because paprika is what holds this marriage together, I said. She rolled her eyes and returned to aligning spice jars with the same intensity most people reserve for heart surgery. That was my moment. I figured if I was going to initiate a conversation that had been bubbling under my skin for weeks, it might as well be while she was preoccupied with seasonings. Ruth, I said, setting down the laptop, hypothetically, if someone you lived with was rating other people they met on a spreadsheet, what would that mean to you? Without missing a beat, she said, depends. Are we talking about attractiveness? Or like, how well they parallel park? That's the thing with Ruth. Her ability to deflect is Olympic level. She could probably dodge accountability in zero gravity. But I pressed on. Let's say it includes vague notes, suspicious locations, and reward values. She paused, turning slowly like a robot that had detected a software breach. What are you talking about, Douglas? Oh, nothing, I said, stretching. Just had a weird dream where my wife was casually documenting her extracurricular social experiments in our joint budget file. Her nostrils flared slightly, like she was processing whether this was sarcasm or an actual accusation wrapped in deadpan delivery. She went back to the jars. You should really stop drinking those weird nighttime teas, she muttered. I should, I agreed. Especially the ones that make me read spreadsheets you leave unlocked with scoring systems for mystery men. Her hand stopped. Full stop. Turmeric stayed in her grip like it was suddenly radioactive. That file was for personal reflection, she said after a beat. Like that was a normal thing to say. Everyone's allowed that. Of course, I said. I've got a folder called Do Not Open Deep Thoughts About Leaf Blowers. We all have our thing. She turned to face me, arms crossed now, one eyebrow practically forming its own paragraph. Why were you looking at that file? It was in the middle of our budget sheets. I wasn't trying to find it. It found me. Like the time I discovered you subscribed to a crystal healing newsletter and forgot to cancel. That was an experiment. So was this, apparently. The air between us went still, like we'd both walked into the same silent joke, but hadn't agreed who got to deliver the punchline. You're being dramatic, she said. That's rich, I replied. You made a rating scale for grown men. One guy got bonus points for owning a record player. I didn't know vinyl was a moral compass. She opened her mouth, closed it again, and finally settled on. It wasn't cheating. It was curiosity. I stared at her, trying to decide which was worse, the fact that she said it, or the fact that she seemed to believe it. You labeled one creative and efficient. Were you testing their time management or their choreography? Her face tightened, just slightly. Enough to register that she didn't have a well-rehearsed answer ready. That's how I knew I'd finally gotten ahead of her. Douglas, she said in that tone that usually precedes a condescending monologue about recycling or floor wax. You've spent the last year organizing your socket sets by brand. I didn't complain. This is true, I nodded. Because socket sets don't invite themselves into our house with smooth jazz and better posture than me. She blinked, caught off guard. You've been bored, I said. That's what this is. You decided the most logical cure for boredom was to build a roster. That's not what happened. No? Then what happened? You tripped and landed on a scheduling app? She moved toward the sink and ran water for no reason other than to seem occupied. It's her go-to stalling tactic. She rinses things that are already clean. It's part of her personality now. I didn't act on all of them, she said, over the fake dishwashing. Some were just hypothetical. Sure. And I hypothetically bought a riding mower last summer, but the credit card company saw it differently. The faucet shut off. She leaned on the counter like she was preparing to defend herself in a courtroom, or throw herself into the disposal. Honestly, it could have gone either way. Douglas, she said, slowly, like she was testing out my name for the first time. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I just wanted to know what I was missing. Was it empathy? Because I think you might have skipped that day. She sighed and rubbed her temple. The universal sign for, please stop making this worse by being funny. I never planned on this going anywhere, she said. But it did. And you documented it. With reviews. She shook her head like I'd missed the point. Like I'd focused on the spreadsheet and not the sad existential spreadsheet of her emotional needs. You could have talked to me, I said. I tried. You were always in the garage or working on one of your projects. You used to take me places. You used to enjoy not taking places for granted. She bit the inside of her cheek. That's the Ruth version of screaming into a pillow. I guess we both checked out, she said. Yeah. Except one of us made a user guide for the exit. For a moment, I thought she was going to apologize. Her mouth moved like it had an apology on the tip of it, somewhere behind the molars, stuck near that expensive crown she dropped. But instead, she said, so what now? Good question. I'd had a plan brewing, something too petty to say out loud, but not petty enough to be regrettable. I wanted her to feel it. Not through drama. Not through begging. Just cold, calculated discomfort. We'll finish the spice cabinet, I said. She looked at me like I was deranged. Seriously? Absolutely. Alphabetical order. And after that, I'm going to update the spreadsheet. What spreadsheet? The new one I started. Ruth, compatibility forecast. I've been documenting our interactions. Notes include, unusually defensive when confronted, and believes flirting is equivalent to personal growth. She rolled her eyes so hard I swear I heard it. That's immature. Not nearly as immature as rating strangers on a points system. But don't worry, you're still averaging a 6. And I'm rounding up. She left the room without slamming the door, which was probably the most respectful thing she'd done all week. I stayed where I was, grabbing the jar of paprika and wondering if it was actually any good, or just something we kept around out of habit. Just like the marriage, only with less flavor. There's something underrated about petty revenge. Not the overblown kind with property damage or weepy public confessions, but the subtle kind. The kind that seeps under the skin and sticks like glitter you didn't know you spilled. That's the category I was aiming for. Elegant, understated, and absolutely irritating. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want to cry. And I certainly didn't want to deliver some speech with trembling hands about trust and heartbreak. That wasn't my style. Ruth had already staged her performance in spreadsheet theater. I figured it was time for me to curate something of my own. It started with the closet. More specifically, with a subtle shift in arrangement. Ruth, for reasons I've never understood, believed the left side of the closet was the more dignified side. According to her, it caught better light and wasn't as drafty, which made no sense considering both sides were equally sad and beige. So I swapped our clothes. Her favorite cardigans and pressed blouses moved right. My jeans and beat-up polos moved left. I didn't say a word. I just waited. The next morning, she stood inside the closet for 7 silent minutes. "You moved my clothes." "I did," I said, brushing my teeth. Felt like a right side of the closet kind of day. She didn't argue. That would have made her seem petty. Instead, she just stood there, blinking, recalculating her routine like a malfunctioning navigation system. She eventually got dressed and left the closet like it had personally betrayed her. That was phase 1. Phase 2 began with a clipboard. I told Ruth I had been feeling emotionally stagnant and needed to evaluate my life through new metrics. She rolled her eyes. I said I was taking a holistic inventory of satisfaction. She groaned. I told her I'd be rating her. Her face tightened. "Like in what way?" "Overall performance," I said. "You know, marital consistency, communication clarity, general likability." "You're joking." "Only partially." I created a form. It included categories like response time to basic questions, conflict avoidance strategy, and believability of excuses. Each had a checkbox system ranging from excellent to why are we married. I left it on the kitchen table every morning and reviewed it over coffee. I didn't even mark it, just tapped my pen thoughtfully and frowned sometimes. She never asked to see it, but I caught her glancing more than once. Next, I bought a small whiteboard. I mounted it on the wall above the laundry hamper. Ruth believed whiteboards belonged in classrooms or corporate meeting rooms. Seeing one in her hallway was like finding a raccoon in the dishwasher. I labeled it Douglas Weekly Notes and updated it every other day. Some examples. Tuesday, Ruth used the phrase "it's fine" 3 times. 2 were convincing. Thursday, closet side discomfort remains unresolved. Saturday, unexpected silence during game night. Possibly scheming or bored. She never mentioned the board, but one night, I noticed someone had erased my Wednesday note about her tendency to sigh like a disappointed librarian. She claimed the board must have been smudged accidentally. Sure. Then came phase 3, the email rebrand. Ruth ran a local community newsletter. It was called Fairview Quarterly, a 6-page PDF filled with things like upcoming bake sales, water bill reminders, and passive-aggressive messages about lawn care etiquette. She treated it like a major media outlet. And, for some reason, had me listed as a technical editor even though I hadn't edited anything since high school when I corrected someone's grammar on a bathroom stall. I offered to help modernize the workflow. "What does that mean?" she asked suspiciously. "Automation," I said, with the casual confidence of someone who Googled 2 things and now pretended to have a tech startup. She agreed. I took over formatting. What Ruth didn't notice was that I subtly rewrote the bios in the Meet the Neighbors section. Nothing scandalous. Just small details. Janet Goldsmith's blurb changed from gardening enthusiast to proud collector of discontinued salad forks. Eli Brenner, a retired postman, was now writing a memoir titled Mail and Other Lies. And Ruth? Ruth's bio read, "Ruth enjoys community engagement, alphabetizing condiments, and exploring new interpretations of fidelity. I sent it out. She didn't speak to me for 2 days. When she did, it was to tell me you're pushing it. Just thought it sounded vibrant, I replied. People love multidimensional characters. You're acting like a child, she snapped. No, I said. Children are honest. I'm being extremely adult about this. That was a Thursday. Friday morning, she took the whiteboard down. She replaced it with an inspirational quote print that said, "Do small things with great love," which I found hilarious considering her idea of great love lately was logging encounters like Yelp reviews. Phase 4 was quiet. It involved things like updating her contact photo on my phone to a stock image of a caution sign, changing our Netflix profile to her least favorite genre, sci-fi documentaries, responding to her text reminders with calendar invites labeled pending review. I wasn't angry, not in the traditional sense. I was invested. It was like watching a very slow, very awkward play unfold where the audience and the lead actress didn't know they were in the same production. One night, during our routine 5 minutes of couch interaction before she disappeared to check emails, she asked if I wanted to go to her niece's birthday party the following weekend. I might be busy, I said, without looking up from the crossword I wasn't actually solving. Doing what? I'm evaluating potential options. She blinked. What does that mean? Reward value, I said, echoing her words. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. Instead, she reached for the remote, turned off the TV, and sat still for a minute like someone rebooting. Are you going to do this forever? She finally asked. Just until I understand what I'm missing, I replied. Isn't that what this is all about? That was the first time she didn't try to defend herself. She didn't even look annoyed. She looked uncertain, like someone who misplaced their glasses and didn't want to admit they were on their head. I went back to my crossword. She sat there for a while longer before standing up and walking to the bedroom. The door closed softly. No slams. No passive sighs. And that, more than anything, told me it was working. Ruth started journaling. I found the notebook on a Tuesday because she's never been good at hiding anything that isn't emotionally repressed. It was floral, spiral-bound, and tucked in the laundry basket underneath a single sock, which I assume was her version of camouflage. I didn't open it. Not because I'm noble, but because I knew exactly what would be inside. A series of entries with words like unsure, stuck, and he's changed, followed by sentences that avoided saying anything useful. Ruth has a long history of using multiple words to describe feelings without actually identifying the feelings themselves. Instead of reading it, I placed it gently on top of her pillow with a note that said, "Left your sock diary in the laundry." No signature, just pure, unfiltered middle-aged passive aggression. That night, she brought the notebook to the dinner table and set it down like we were going to have a performance review. "I think we should talk," she said, flattening her hands on the table. "That's new," I said. "You've been substituting conversation with sighs for months." "I'm serious. You're also inconsistent, but go on." She ignored that. She always ignored things she didn't feel like addressing, which worked out great for about 7 years, and then not at all after the spreadsheet came to light. "I've been thinking about everything," she said, in that slow, rehearsed tone people use when they're sure their version of events is more palatable than the truth. "Same," I said. "You know, I started keeping a list. Did you know that for 4 years you've said you were allergic to mushrooms, and then ate 3 of them at Linda's birthday party? That's not what this is about. Is it not?" She shifted in her seat, probably regretting the journaling idea now that it had graduated into conversation with an audience of one and no editor. "I know I hurt you," she began. "Which part hurt more?" I asked. "The organized dishonesty or the fact that one of your notes described a guy as having intellectually mischievous eyebrows?" She blinked. "You read it?" "No," I said, "but that sounds like something you'd write." She pulled the journal toward her like it might offer her protection. For a moment, I wondered if she was going to read an entry out loud, which would have been a bold move considering the stage she was standing on was mostly quicksand. "I think we lost sight of each other," she said. "We didn't lose sight," I corrected. "You just looked over my shoulder and decided someone else was worth more points on a made-up scale. I didn't do this to hurt you." "Well, that's great. Most people say that after a fender bender, but sure, same principle." She sighed. I made a tally in my head. That was sign number 203 since March. I don't know why I did what I did. That's comforting. It's like I kept waiting for you to notice I wasn't happy. I did notice. You just preferred I pretend everything was fine while you experimented with scheduling strangers like personal trainers. You make it sound worse than it was. No, Ruth. I make it sound exactly how it was, but with less punctuation. She reached for the notebook again. I could tell she wanted to show me something in it. Probably some paragraph that would explain her feelings in a neatly centered, italicized sentence. I shook my head. If you need to read your own handwriting to explain this, maybe don't. I didn't mean for this to become what it became. That's what people say after buying one too many candles, not after appending a marriage. She was quiet. The journal just sat there, unopened and exposed, like it had tried its best, and still wasn't helpful. I've been thinking about leaving, she said. For who? No one. That would be refreshing. She looked down at her hands, now twisting a pen cap in slow, tiny circles. I miss when we used to laugh. I stared at her. You miss when I didn't know? Her lips tightened, not in anger, more like resignation. She was finally catching up to the reality I'd been living in for weeks. The jokes weren't jokes anymore. The passive-aggressive observations weren't clever distractions. I hadn't been trying to win her back. I had just been waiting to see what she'd do with the last bit of space we shared. I guess I hoped you'd understand, she said. I do, I replied. You were bored. You were restless. You were dissatisfied. And instead of changing your own life, you tiptoed around mine with a clipboard and a rating scale. Her face shifted slightly. No defensiveness this time. No comeback. Just a tired expression that looked a lot like truth. Not the poetic kind. The plain, unwashed, awkward truth you never want to say out loud. I think we're done, Ruth. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just nodded. I'll stay at my sister's for a while. You should update your spreadsheet, I said. New category. Husband with exceptional tolerance for ridiculous behavior. Give me a solid 8. Maybe even an 8.5 if you're feeling generous. I don't think I deserve to rate you anymore, she said. For once, we agree. She left the notebook on the table. I didn't open it. I picked it up, walked it to the bedroom, and placed it inside the drawer where we used to keep our passports. It sat there next to 2 expired travel-sized toothpaste tubes and a single sock that didn't belong to me. Ruth packed that night in silence. I didn't help. She didn't ask. When she closed the front door behind her, I didn't feel relief or sadness. I felt exactly the same as I had the day before, like someone whose house finally matched the conversation inside it. No more whiteboards. No more journal clues. No more sighs pretending to be sentences. Just quiet. And, if nothing else, honest space. 3 days after Ruth left, I opened the hallway cabinet and found 5 identical candle holders. Not similar, identical. All of them shaped like pine cones. All of them tagged from a seasonal home store she used to visit when she needed to reconnect with aesthetic intention, which was her way of justifying spending $68 on glass that smelled like bark. I lined them up on the kitchen counter and stared at them like they were suspects in a mild financial crime. Ruth hadn't taken much. A few suitcases. Her laptop. Her charger, which she often forgot, but somehow remembered this time with suspicious precision. She didn't take the couch pillow she always adjusted because it was too aggressively stuffed, or the kitchen timer she claimed was psychologically off by 7 seconds. That was still sitting on the stove, blinking like it was also unsure what came next. The house felt quieter, not in a dramatic, echoing kind of way. More like everything had stopped trying to impress anyone. The dishwasher no longer beeped after a cycle. The thermostat defaulted to whatever temperature it wanted. Even the front door creaked differently, like it was done pretending to be graceful. I didn't cry. I didn't make a list of things I missed. I didn't hold her sweater like a widow in a melodrama. I organized the toolbox. I rearranged the bookshelf. I unsubscribed from a shared email for a podcast Ruth never actually listened to, but kept because she liked how the host pronounced narrative. I told exactly 2 people what happened. My brother Frank, who replied with, honestly, I thought something was off with her since the pineapple lamp incident. And Marcy, who gave me a nod that said she wanted to be surprised but couldn't manage it. The real turning point came when I visited the library, not for any poetic reason, but because Ruth never liked libraries. Said the lighting gave her migraines. I'd avoided it for most of our marriage because, like a fool, I thought it was a gesture of compromise. Turns out, I just missed the feeling of not being told how long I was allowed to browse nonfiction. While there, I picked up a book on Scandinavian joinery. Not because I wanted to start building chairs, but because it was silent, interesting, and didn't rate my mood on a spreadsheet. When I got home, I put the book on the coffee table. And then I sat down and, for the first time in weeks, didn't feel like I was mid-scene in a low-budget relationship drama. A few days later, Ruth texted, "I'll come by Friday to pick up a few more things. Let me know if that's okay." I stared at the message longer than necessary. Not because I didn't know how to respond. I just enjoyed the silence that existed before it needed a reply. Sure. 4 o'clock. She arrived at 4:07. Classic Ruth. Punctuality with just enough defiance to seem like a statement. She wore a sweatshirt I didn't recognize and jeans that looked newly purchased. She looked good. Not good in a regrettable way, just put together. The way you do when you want to prove you're adjusting faster than expected. She didn't come in at first. Just stood at the doorway with that polite, half-forced smile people use when they see someone from high school at a gas station. "Hey," she said. "Hey." We stood there, two people who used to discuss cutting boards like it was an Olympic event, now unable to decide who should break the silence. "I'll be quick," she said. "You usually are," I replied. She exhaled through her nose in that familiar, flatlined sigh. No drama, just resignation. She moved through the house with a strange level of reverence, like she was touring a place she used to rent in a past life. She packed a few sweaters, grabbed her favorite pair of headphones, and took a stack of her work notebooks. I noticed she avoided the bookshelf, the candle holders, and the print in the hallway that said, "Live Honestly," which had aged like a carton of milk in direct sunlight. Before she left, she turned to me like she wanted to say something meaningful. I braced myself for it. I expected a half apology. A maybe I wasn't fair to you. Some version of "you didn't deserve that." But Ruth, true to form, delivered something much more on brand. "Have you changed the Wi-Fi password?" I blinked. "No." "What?" "I still get updates from the thermostat app. Feel free to unsubscribe." She nodded, like that was the last real thread we had left. Then she looked at me. Really looked. I couldn't tell if she was searching for guilt, pain, or just trying to catalog the expression on my face for her next journal entry. "Are you okay?" "I'm adjusting," I said. "The pinecones have taken it the hardest." She smirked. "Just barely." Then she left without closing the door all the way. It made sense. Ruth was always someone who needed the option to turn around. I didn't close it either. Not immediately. I stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at the quiet neighborhood, the sky that didn't seem to care, and the sidewalk she was walking down like it was just another errand. When I finally shut the door, it didn't feel like a grand gesture. It felt like putting down a book you didn't finish but already understood. The next week, I moved the couch 2 feet to the left. For no reason other than it had been there for years, and I'd never questioned it. Then I rearranged the mugs. Throughout the chipped one she said had character. Ordered a new shower curtain because I never liked the old one, but never had enough opinion to fight about it. Little things. Simple things. I didn't need a big breakthrough. I didn't need to reinvent myself. I just needed a little space between who I had been with Ruth and who I was without the background noise. When people ask if I'm bitter, I tell them the truth. I'm practical. Ruth built a private rating system. I built a new shelf. She kept notes on strangers. I learned to live without whiteboards in the hallway. No, there's no poetic ending here. No sudden realization that I was at fault for everything, or that I found a deeper meaning in betrayal. I didn't write a song. I didn't hike a mountain. I went to the DMV. I updated my emergency contact form. I'm fine. Better than fine, really. Because Ruth left behind more than a spreadsheet and scented candles. She left behind the version of me who waited around for validation, dressed up as compromise. And I don't miss him. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel